I'm ready.
Call to order the meeting of the Saraville Planning Board. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Prior to calling the meeting, we'd like to take this moment for a moment of silence for our slain councilwoman. And I'd like to open the floor to any members of the board who would like to offer any words, comments.
Thank you, Chairman. In moments like this, when our community is so deeply affected by something that happens, I think it is an opportunity for us to reflect on why we serve and the people who choose to serve. Councilwoman Jim Foer's legacy to this town is forever cemented, and folks with much more eloquent words than mine have spoken pretty beautifully about her. What I would like to say as a citizen is that there has been a GoFundMe that has been established for her daughter that has been put out officially by the borough. If anyone has any questions, you can certainly reach out and we would be happy to connect you with that resource. A lot of times when someone is taken from us, the initial shock recedes and we forget about those who are left behind. It is our job and obligation as public servants that we make sure that does not happen. Councilwoman Jim Foer's legacy will continue to be stories that we tell our kids. And I hope that others are equally called to serve the way that Eunice was. So, thank you.
Chairman, if I may, first, Council President, my condolences. I know you and the councilwoman were close. I did not have the pleasure of knowing her very long. The conversations I did have with her were always pleasant. She was always upbeat. You know, it's when a tragedy like that happens in Saraville, it hits each and every one of us. It's shocking. It's awe. And we will come together as a community to support each and every one of you on council and her family members.
So I'm going to conclude. There's a book that I read when I'm not feeling too good about the world. It's called The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch, and it's a book written by a professor who is dying of pancreatic cancer. And he wrote this book called The Last Lecture for his students, and along with his young children who wouldn't see him grow up, but he wanted to make sure he encapsulated all the life lessons. And there's a chapter in the book called Be a Communitarian. And the professor talks about how there's an emphasis in this country on the idea of people's rights. And that's how it should be. But it makes no sense to talk about rights without also talking about responsibilities. Rights have to come from somewhere, they come from the community. In return, all of us have a responsibility. So, communitarian movement. The notion that rights come with responsibilities is a strange concept that I think we as adults aren't the best role models. We don't know we have a right to jury trial and get those lines of people what their duty to try to contribute. But everyone has to contribute to the common good. And when we're connected to others, we become better people. And I met Eunice a few times. I met her when she was campaigning. Unequivocally, Eunice was a communitarian. She connected all of us to each other. It didn't matter what the political party was, it didn't matter what the view of politics were, it doesn't matter what it lived. She connected all of us in this community and made us better people. And there can be no greater service to our community than that. So we must honor her legacy and keep those connections alive with every aspect of our community, just like she did, regardless of our political differences, etc. So I would like to extend this board's most deepest sympathies to her, her family, her daughter, and to you, Councilman Noah. I know that you were family to her. If anyone else has anything to say, otherwise we have to business. Okay, so let me call to order the meeting again. Beth, has this meeting been advertised in accordance with the Open and Public Meetings Act?
Yes, Chairman, it has.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Allegra?
Here.
Mr. Blamar? Mr. Buchanan?
Here.
Councilman Onoha?
Here.
Ms. Pulowski?
Here.
Mr. Spizzato? Chairman Mueller?
Here,
Mr. Cornell? Mr. Fowler?
Here.
We have a quorum.
thank you. Are there any resolutions for memorialization?
None this evening.
Any minutes for memorialization?
The minutes are from the reorganization and regular meeting of January 4th, 2023. Can-
Chairman, I move that the minutes be approved, subject to any corrections necessary.
All in favor? Opposed? Okay.
Site plans and subdivisions, Beth, are there any on the calendar? for tonight?
None this evening.
Any old business, new business administrative matters?
The first thing, the members all received the RFPs for the attorney, and we should take this time to discuss and appoint one. Would you like to make a motion, Mr. Blumar? For Tom? I'll do a roll call. Mr. Allegra?
Yes.
Mr. Blumar?
Yes.
Mr. Buchanan?
Yes.
Councilman Onoha?
Yes.
Mr. Spizzato? Chairman Mueller?
Yes.
Thank you. We welcome.
Mr. Barlow, could you please step up? So-
Yeah, he's right next to you.
Ask where you want me to sit.
Right here.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Barlow.
The next order of matter this evening, we have Hire Gruel and Associates will discuss issues and potential recommendations to the master plan as part of the re-examination report.
Ms. Plowman, welcome.
Thank
Just Step up.
Can you just move? That's fine, as long as you. Too much, okay.
Welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself to the board?
Yes, my name is Lee Fleming. I am a principal at Hire Girl and Associates. Our firm has been tasked with preparing the master plan reexamination report for the borough of Sayreville. We're here I am here this evening to get your feedback. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to just give an overview of the order of events for the evening. So first, I'm going to give a general summary of what a master plan is and how it relates to land use ordinances. Then we're going to go into the policies, goals, and objectives that were laid out in the prior master plan of 2013. It is my understanding that everyone has that with them today. It's kind of par for the course, so we have to see if those are still valid first. And then after that, we're going to go into potential issues and recommendations. I have highlighted a couple of things, but I am going to want to hear from all of you, both as planning board members and as residents in the community. So first, I'm going to go into what a master plan is. And I'm sorry if this is a repeat for some people, but I think it's very good to just set the stage so we all know why we're here. So a master plan is a planning document developed to guide the use of lands within a municipality in a manner which protects public health, safety, and promotes general welfare. Under the municipal land use law, this document is adopted by the planning board. Now, this document essentially serves as a blueprint or roadmap that is used to guide decisions regarding land use. This pertains to both growth, conservation, where uses are located, and that pertains to commercial, housing, mixed-use development, recreational spaces, et cetera, as well as the intensity and bulk regulations thereof. Now, this master plan, as I said, it is a blueprint or a roadmap It is the basis of a municipality zoning and redevelopment. And this, again, is the document that's adopted by the planning board. These policies are then implemented through zoning and land use regulation, and those regulations are adopted by the governing body. Now, prior to the adoption of any land use ordinance, it has to get referred back to the planning board and to be determined if it's consistent with the master plan. So essentially, again, to summarize, the master plan is the policy of land use, and then the ordinances are the actual laws of land use. So while the planning board does not draft and adopt ordinances, it sets forth the policy that all those ordinances are supposed to align with. And generally speaking, the master plan is supposed to determine land use, location, intensity for the next 10 years. So it's the roadmap for the next 10 years. Now, tonight, we're here to go over the master plan re-exam. So the master plan re-examination essentially serves as a checkup, for lack of a better term. It's intended to review and evaluate the local master plan and development regulations to determine if there needs to be any updates, revisions, changes. Clarification also falls under that. Per the municipal land use law, this is required to be done at least every 10 years, but it's also permitted to be done more frequently than that. Say if there was a big change that determined that, if there was a big change where then the municipality determined that, you know what, we need to speed up this checkup. There've been a lot of changes lately, and 10 years is just going to be too long. There's certain changes that we need to accommodate and account for right now. So there are 6 required sections of a reexamination report. I'm just going to go through them. I apologize. I am going to read them just so we all know what they are. And then we're going to go through them together. So Section A is the major problems, objectives relating to land development in the municipality at the time of the adoption of the last reexamination report. While the MLUL says reexamination report, this also can be substituted for master plan. So like in Sayreville's case, the 2013 document was a master plan. In certain instances, a municipality may find it's not necessary to do a new master plan yet, so they'll just have a couple of reexaminations. So that's where we're going to go through, where I read aloud the stated goals and objectives and ask all of you, is this still valid? Which kind of loops into Section B, which is the extent to which the problems objectives have been reduced and have increased up to this date. So for our purposes tonight, we're going to merge those together. I'm not going to just read what they are first and then ask for your commentary later. We're just going to go through them one by one. And then Section C is the extent to which there have been significant changes in assumptions, policy, and objectives forming the basis for the master plan or development regulations as last revised, with particular regard to the density and distribution of population, land uses, housing conditions, circulation, conservation of natural resources, energy conservation, collection, disposition, recycling of designated recyclable materials, and changes in state, county, and local policies and objectives. So Section C, as stated, is very long. The short version is that in Section C, the master plan re-exam is really going to go through what has changed. So it's going to include demographic information, where it's going to show like this was the population, then this is the population now, this is how many housing units there were then, this is how many housing units there were now. Most of it is demographic and data related to building permits and similar. And then it gets into addressing essentially laws that have changed at the state level, county level, and local level. It'll also address if any plans have been done. So for example, Middlesex County had a 2022 open space plan. The NJTPA recently released their 2050 plan. And while the NJTPA is like the Northern New Jersey Transportation Agency, it does address things that are going on in Middlesex County, which may or may not affect Sayreville. So C is the very long essentially what's everything that has changed both demographically and legally. And then D is specific changes recommended for the master plan or development regulations, if any, including underlying objectives, policy standards, or whether a new plan or regulation should be prepared. So it's in section D that we would include if tonight the board has recommendations of uses that are missing in the municipality or problems that they've noticed, whether it's something like traffic, parking, problems caused by drive-throughs, if the landscaping regulations that exist aren't sufficient. So like, for example, if the board is getting applications and technically speaking, they are completely compliant with the current required landscaping. And if the board feels, and this is just an example, I promise this is not like a leading example. If the board feels like, like our buffering regulations, like they're really not sufficient. We have these applications that come in, they don't need waiver relief or variances, but when I look at the plan, the amount of trees that are on there, not sufficient. Like that would be something that would go into section D, that would be feedback that I would get from the board after we go through if the policy goals and objectives are still valid. And then section E is the recommendations of the land use board considering the incorporation of redevelopment plans adopted pursuant to the local redevelopment and housing law into the land use plan element of the municipal master plan, and recommended changes, if any, in the local development regulations necessary to effectuate redevelopment plans in the municipality. So essentially in section E, we would account for all redevelopment plans that exist today, with particular emphasis on those that did not exist at the time of the 2013 plan. This would also be the section where the planning board could give feedback regarding if certain modifications should be made to those plans, whether that's the regulations within the plans themselves, or if perhaps those areas should be expanded. All of that can be covered in section E. And then section F is the recommendations of the land use board concerning locations appropriate for the development of public electric vehicle infrastructure, including but not limited to commercial districts areas. I'm actually not going to continue reading F. And the reason for that is recently there were state regulations passed about electric vehicle charging stations. So section F has essentially become a moot point. While the board can still comment on places that they would particularly like to see it, because there's state regulations now regarding like specific set-asides that are required for EV charging stations or make-ready spaces and mixed-use developments, multifamily developments, commercial developments. That's why I say section F is kind of moot, and I'm not going to go through reading the whole thing because it's essentially been overruled. So now that we've gone through what a master plan is and what a master plan re-exam is, my intention is to go into and go over the policies, goals, and objectives with the board to see if that's still valid. But before I do that, are there any questions about what the master plan is and the re-examination? Okay, I just want to make sure. So we're going to start on page G1 of the master plan that's in front of you. And the way that this is set up is essentially there's 4 goals at the 4 general policies at the beginning, and then there's going to be several goals. And the way the Sayreville master plan is set up is each goal has supporting objectives. So they are all grouped together and they support each other. So the first general policy, and it even says in the introduction that this is the forms a statement which serves as a guide to the borough's features. So that goes into the roadmap that I discussed earlier. So the first one is social. The primary residential character and community cohesiveness of the borough should be maintained and where possible reinforced. So if that's, I think this might be easier if someone raises their hand if they don't think it's valid, because I think a lot of these are. Okay. The next is aesthetic. The quality and character of the borough should be maintained and improved by emphasizing a desirable visual environment. Okay. Economic, a viable commercial community entity should be maintained and desirable business growth encouraged consistent with the social and aesthetic policies. It is necessary to maintain a stable tax and employment base while facilitating the borough's strategic location within Middlesex County and the state. Functional, maintenance, and where necessary, expansion of improvement of community services, facilities, and other physical infrastructure should be encouraged in support of the social, aesthetic, and economic policies.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are these standard general policies in virtually every master plan?
So every master plan is different, just like every municipality is different. So these are pretty common overall in some municipalities that in master plan, these might just be general goals. And that's just, like I said, every town is different, every master plan is different. So in some instances, they don't open with general policies. They may just have an overall statement, but these are pretty common. Just making sure that generally that the residential character is preserved and maintained where possible. So we hold on to our little neighborhoods that exist, maintain that neighborhood character. Aesthetics are always a common policy. Wanting to have a stable tax base and employment opportunities. Sometimes they'll throw in something like making sure that all essentially like goods and services that would be necessary for the residents and businesses are provided. But it generally, yes, I could have just said yes to that question. I'm sorry. So the first goal is preserve existing residential neighborhoods. Since it's similar to the policy that we all agreed was still relevant, I'm just going to go through the objectives. Some of these they're not technically redundant because they don't say exactly the same thing, but they are very similar. So one is examine all residential zone boundaries and recommend adjustments to protect residential uses. So it seems like that one would still be valid, essentially making sure that the residential zones stay where they are and that there isn't encroachment. And then discourage the removal of existing viable residential neighborhoods in favor of non-residential neighborhoods. So like if neighborhoods are strong and there isn't a lot of vacancy, that those are going to be preserved and not flipped into commercial. And then encourage owner occupancy of residential dwellings. Continue to discourage encroachment of commercial or industrial and single family neighborhoods. And then to emphasize the importance of vigorous code enforcement programs and maintenance of viable residential neighborhoods. So again, I'm going to go by raise your hand if you think one of these is not valid.
I have a question.
Yes.
The encourage owner occupancy of residential dwellings. Is there a way to put that stronger wording, or is that something that's typical?
I'm going to be honest with you. I think that wording is already pretty strong because you can really only encourage owner occupancy of residential dwellings. So per the law, you can't really like stipulate that something has to be owner or rental. It's kind of the way the law is. Like you can't necessarily prevent subletting either. So I get what you're saying, but like I think the way it is kind of the way it would need to. I don't know that you could actually make that stronger.
Okay.
Okay.
How does the borough's moral obligations impact with that?
Yes. So Mount Laurel is kind of the exception to, remember I just said, I was like, you can't force things to be for sale or rental. Mount Laurel is the exception because there is a requirement to have a certain percentage be family rental units. But at the same time, it's not necessarily counter to each other because you can still encourage owner occupancy of residential units, but you can't, it's not conflicting because we're saying encourage, we're not saying prohibit. So we're then not having a conflict with Mount Laurel. So it's kind of like, if we get the choice, this is what we would like, but it's not like a fire and brimstone. And that's part of why I said like the way it is kind of the way it has to stay, because there is Mount Laurel that does have requirements for rental. Oh, I missed the next one on the next page. My apologies. And that was emphasize curb, sidewalk, and pavement rehabilitation programs in residential neighborhoods is another objective. So it's essentially like having the streetscape be pleasant in these residential neighborhoods and well maintained. So the second goal is to encourage aesthetic and site improvements in the borough's major commercial and industrial areas. And this is supported by, three objectives. Maintain the character of commercial/professional office zones by appropriate zoning and site design. implement appropriate site control regulations, and maintain strict limits on the location of non-residential development, particularly high-intensity uses, and discourage urban commercial intrusion into residential areas. So the goals and objectives that relate to the non-residential uses are actually similar to the ones for residential uses, because we're essentially saying that we still want to have those lines, like have the industrial where the industrial is, have the single family where the single family is, and prevent encroachment into those areas. Now, the third goal is to encourage and promote an improved visual environment and the preservation of natural systems in environmentally sensitive areas. The objectives that support this are review development regulations with respect to height, coverage, setback, landscaping, and similar items in order to achieve desirable development without artificial or arbitrary restrictions. Encourage improved visual and physical access to the Raritan River. In specific cases, encourage pedestrian access to the Raritan River consistent with the borough's waterfront development policies. Encourage water-related activities along the Raritan River, and then review zoning regulations to encourage those uses, which will provide the opportunity for the general public to enjoy the Raritan and South Rivers. Yes.
Okay, so talking about the current businesses, one of the concerns I've always had when you drive into town is seeing non-family friendly businesses,
Okay.
suggestive businesses of that sort. Is there an area in this area that we could put wording so that it's more community-based rather than adult-based? Because obviously we have businesses in town and it's the face of our community. And I know other towns have eliminated these types of businesses.
Yeah. So I think we could come up with something. That's something that I don't know that I can come up with a solution right this second, but I am going to take note of this. It may be in terms of like commercial, like have commercial uses that support the needs of residents, families, the community. Sorry, I just want to take note. Because the other thing that is a little bit difficult with adult uses, so I'm saying it's difficult, it's not impossible, is to my knowledge, a lot of them are grandfathered in. So the ones that exist, you can't like show up and just shut down tomorrow if
No, I
they're just,
understand.
yeah, no. That's why I'm saying that I think I understand what you're saying, but that's why I can't come up
Oh, I get
with
it.
the necessary language.
I don't expect you to have it right now.
Yeah,
It's just to put it out there because it's something that I see every day going home. And I'm an adult and there's children that don't need to see that.
I understand. I used to live in Old Bridge, which is
On the other
along
side.
some of those same corridors, so. Okay, so the next goal is encourage the maintenance of the existing business community and provide for desirable new commercial development. And the objectives are develop a growth strategy to properly position the borough with regard to anticipated regional and county growth, continue to encourage and promote economic reuse of existing structures, encourage major visual improvements in business areas, which will provide a pedestrian emphasis, encourage new development, which will not place unmanageable demands on the borough's infrastructure and/or will assume responsibility for required improvements in an equitable manner, and prepare detailed redevelopment plans and coordinations with the SCRA to provide design and priority guidelines for significant development and initiate programs to study the desirability of additional redevelopment initiatives. Okay, I will also add, like Mr. Buchanan has been doing, if you have something that you would like to add, I think that's actually a great time where it's like, we're going over things and everyone says, yes, that's still valid. But if someone has an idea of something to add, it is good to do it right now because it's like while we're seeing it.
Do you have any suggestions to add?
So what I will say is that the goals and objectives are pretty broad. And in a lot of ways, I think that's good, particularly because it has to guide development for the next 10 years. something that I noticed is there doesn't seem to be, and I may embarrass myself if it's a couple later and I just forgot. But there isn't really any commentary on mixed use development. There's a lot of residential and commercial, but in the goals and objectives, we aren't really addressing if there's areas where like apartments over retail would be appropriate. If there are any places that that would be appropriate, and it may be that the goal and objective doesn't exist because the planning board doesn't think something like mixed use is okay. But I noticed like that is something that is missing, but something I always say at these meetings is this is your document and this is your community. This is not my document or my community. So in this instance, like you guys are the expert. But that was just what I noticed is something that was missing. It's we have residential, commercial, and it doesn't really seem to address areas where there would be any exception to that.
Is that still the trend right now? The commercial on the bottom, the storefronts on the bottom, and then the dwellings above? I know I've seen it. I know a few years back, that was the trend.
I think actually in the Riverton project, there's a lot of proposal for that, and also along your Main Street downtown area here. There are
Yeah.
discussions about having commercial with apartments up above.
So the discussion that was had would be better to put in writing, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's again, looping
Very
back
good.
to if that is something that Saraville wants to continue. I can say, while this isn't me doing a total inventory of every municipality, that type of development has become very common. And part of that is also, for example, like where it's appropriate. So like on Main Street, this is a very pedestrian friendly area. There's also a lot of businesses where you would want to typically have activity on the street, and having mixed use development does help lend itself to that, because by having commercial on the ground floor, you're having activity. What I will also say is that not all ground floor commercial is equal in terms of contributing to activity. So what I mean by that is if you have uses, and I also want a disclaimer, I'm not saying that these uses are inherently bad. I'm just saying that if your intention is to have a lot of activity on the street, that these are not going to be your number one priority. But so like, for example, something like a bank. Banks regularly close at like 4:30. There are exceptions of different companies, branches, et cetera. But if you have something like a bank, it's not necessarily going to add activity to the street just by the nature of its operating hours. So that's just as an example. Offices are similar, right? Because a lot of offices are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. They may not contribute to activity on the street the same way that a restaurant or personal service establishment may, just by the nature of their operating hours. But the residential above can also help contribute to activity on the street, because you have people who are living right here versus those who have to drive to that street to then promenade up and down.
Just so I'm clear,
Mhm.
everyone on the board's back, everyone watching.
Yeah,
These are the general objectives by which your firm will re-examine the master plan, correct?
yes,
So this is sort of the skeleton, it's all the details that you fill in. And the
yes.
points that are raised by Mr. Buchanan, which are excellent points, we would be able to go in and specifically target those once you do your re-examination.
Yes, so essentially in what we're doing right now is I'm going to call the general section A and B, which is these are the goals, policies, and objectives that existed in 2013. We're saying if they're still valid, but we're also adding in section D a little bit, which is including recommendations. So in the first part of the re-exam, we're just going to say, is this valid or not? So for example, I have had master plans in other communities where one of the goals or objectives related to something that either no longer existed or was solved. So like, for example, if a town like didn't have a senior center and one of their goals and objectives was to create a space for their seniors, when we're doing the master plan re-exam, we get to that goal and objective and we say like, this is no longer valid because there is now a senior center. So that's what A and B is. We're just saying, are these still valid? But while we're going through these, we can pick up those missing pieces. And it would be in section D where then we would say, while we agree with the ones that were carried forward, these are some goals and objectives that we think need to be added because of how things have changed. So like there was a comment how like now the trend is that mixed use development. So like that is something that's newer that may not have been accounted for in prior plans. So that's kind of how they all relate. It's like, is this still valid? But there is the opportunity that if something's missing, that we can add it. Also, when we're going through it, there's also the opportunity to say, you know, that objective is mostly valid, but this is how it should be tweaked. So there is also that opportunity as well.
Where would something such as reduce high traffic areas, because I think we're going through, there's traffic spots in this borough. Where would that fall within these general terms?
So I don't know under which goal yet, because that is something I would like to marinate on to see where it would be more appropriate. It may also be an opportunity to create a new goal. But I think that's also something we could talk about a little bit more. So when you say high traffic areas, you mean like vehicular traffic?
Yeah, traffic, I think we have some, we're gonna be having some big traffic areas, especially on Chesapeake Avenue going to Bordentown. Especially if there's a new transportation depot for the schools, things like that. I mean that's one issue I think
Mm-hmm.
is an issue of concern for the community.
So
I think I can name a few others, but focusing on the traffic areas, and we already have a pretty big traffic issue on Ernstine Road and Bordentown Avenue that, you know, certain times it's almost untravelable. So,
oh, sorry.
no, but those are the type of things I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
With the warehouses going up, and you're gonna have trucks, and now you're gonna have buses and Cheesequake. What's gonna happen to this?
So the other thing that we can do in master plan re-exams is also call out if additional elements should be redone. So there was a circulation element that was done in 2013, but that was also before a lot of the newer apartment projects. And I know a lot of them also haven't been constructed yet, like Riverton is not there currently, but you know, I'm trying to, okay. Also things like warehouse applications that have come in, which hadn't been in during the 2013. For example, like the Fulton's Landing redevelopment plan had not been done, which was for warehousing at the time of the 2013 plan. So I'm going to take note of this. This may be something that may be more appropriate for a circulation element. But like, it also may be able to be in the master plan re-exam, at least like noted as, because the other thing that master plan re-examination reports do is they take notes of issues or problems that exist in the municipality. So we could potentially even add a section of like problems, like traffic is an issue. Maybe we don't know what to do about it right now, but it's recommended that this is studied and evaluated, and maybe it involves working with Middlesex County for certain roadway improvements. Maybe some of them are our own local roads. In certain instances, as projects come in, there are things like right-of-way dedications, which your engineer is actually going to be much more familiar with right-of-way dedications than I am. It's just not my lane, but these are just examples. Other things, like if jitney services should be explored, I'm not saying that they should be, but like those are other examples of when traffic is an issue, like what are potential solutions? And it's also very good for master plan re-examinations reports. You don't want them to be super, super broad, because like I said, when land use ordinances come back to you, one of the things you're supposed to determine is consistency. So when the master plan re-exam is too broad, you kind of end up in a situation where then literally every land use element, land use ordinance is going to not be inconsistent with the master plan. But at the same time, it's important that things also aren't too specific either. And part of why I say that is generally speaking, like times change. So like there was the state law about like cannabis uses. Airbnb has become a thing, like, you know, like however many years ago Uber didn't exist. Like there's all these changing trends, like, you know, like axe throwing places have become very popular. And like that was something that if you had told me before that was going to become someone's favorite weekend activity, I'd be like, are you insane? They're going to let people like throw axes? Like, are you nuts?
Yeah.
Yes, and also like COVID. And the thing is like, and so that's a great example because that really changed things. Well, I mean, obviously it changed things, but what I mean is that all of a sudden we had meetings that went virtual. Now we have people working from home. Like, what are the implications of that on office space? Is office space really something we could be encouraging? So like that would be an example of if previously one of our goals and objectives was, let's really encourage office space. Now in a post-COVID world, when so many people are working from home, that's something that may not be valid anymore. And it could be modified to say that we don't want to prohibit office space. We don't want to totally discount office space, but maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit on that office space, just given the issues of the existing office space finding occupancy. I know I went around a little bit, so.
So the next piece portion of what we're discussing, we all hear next measure, right? So I hesitate to say we ought to examine execution of this issue. That's too long. So places that would have some hesitation. I'm interested in exploring.
No, I agree. I agree. My thought always was to try to keep the residents in town, to shop, to eat. And that's why I like the idea. But yes, it has to be certain areas. It can't be everywhere in town.
Some other issues, and I welcome any member.
Yeah.
to bring up these issues, because maybe these are issues that aren't general issues, and we'll get to specifically. Obviously, we have a pretty significant amount of moral obligation. How do we potentially satisfy that? Potential crowding of the schools. I know the schools are pretty much at capacity. We have issues with a lot of warehouses going up, and I know this board is quite interested. I think most of the time, but it's going up. There's been a lot of deforestation. Those are some of the major issues that we hear, displacement of existing wildlife. A lot of residents are seeing animals that they never saw before because so many trees are being taken down. And again, if it's not part of the general, I welcome anyone on board, any other issue that you can think of that.
Council President had something.
Yep, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you for your time so far. Regarding the language, I know that the Vice Chair kind of mentioned to see how there can be adjustments on the word encourage,
Mhm.
you know, and
This is
it's when I look at
the owner occupied thing.
just in general, because that's one of the more leading, texts used for majority of the objectives, whether it's encourage, discourage. But, for objective 4A, right, there was a language that was used saying to develop a strategy, and I felt that was more encouraging, than the word encourage, right? Because
Okay.
even for the master plan and a lot of what we're discussing and a lot of what, or at least a good amount from what I believe we hear from our residents is, what is the strategy and what are we going, what is being developed, So personally, I like to see that language used more, especially when it comes to how to improve the traffic circulation, even towards the residential environments, right? And the languages towards open space, I think that it will be encouraging if there's strategy that helps us target how to purchase more open space, or sometimes from the borough standpoint, we negotiate maybe swaps. So there's still strategies that are developed to target certain things. I think that would be more encouraging than just encourage, discourage. I feel as though in the times we're in today, it's not really enough. So it was in 4A that language, a development of a strategy, that was what impacted me so far. I think I like to see that. I think, our board would like to see that more if possible.
Yeah,
So
so
that's just some of what I have so far, but.
stronger language. Okay. I'm going to take apart some things that were just brought up. So first, I'm not going to get into the Mount Laurel obligation. And the reason for that is going to all have to be addressed in the housing element that's done after the third round. We're currently in the third round. It terminates halfway through 2025. the master plan re-exam is going to address that there, because one of the purposes of the master plan re-exam is to point out when potential elements may be required. So like, for example, we just talked about traffic and circulation, like update the circulation element. So the housing element is going to be mentioned for our purposes. And it's not just like for the ease of tonight, it's also just like how Mount Laurel is in the state. The housing element is going to be a separate issue. And I know that everyone here has already gone through it. There's settlement agreements and it's become a different process. But in terms of like deforestation and disappearing wildlife and all of that, like I just said that Middlesex County had released their 2022 open space plan. Like generally looking into doing an open space and recreation plan. Also, when it comes to discussing things like schools, community facilities being examined, opportunities, and within that, a general recommendation of looking to see where possible additional land could be purchased for open space, if it should be added to a ROSI, which is a recreation open space inventory, things like that nature. All of that can definitely be added in recommendations. But by the nature of them, I don't know that they'd necessarily be goals and objectives, because the goals and objectives tend to be very broad. And I think where we can use stronger language. And I understand where you're like, encourage, that's pretty weak. What are we doing? I'm paraphrasing. I'm definitely paraphrasing. But that's part of why goals and objectives are always like encourage, discourage, because those are the broad things. It's like the big picture. But when we get into recommendations, that is where we can be more definitive and use stronger language. So where there are opportunities to make the goals and objectives more definitive, I think we can do that. But generally speaking, they are pretty broad, and the recommendations we can get more fine-tuned. Additionally, I may as well bring it up now. This is essentially phase one, the master plan re-exam. Part of that is because the municipality is required to do it every 10 years, and the master plan that you have in front of you is 2023, right around this time. So we have to do the master plan re-exam now. Phase two is going to be a land use element, and the land use element is also going to be more refined, is how I'll say. So the master plan re-exam may like generally look into warehousing, and the land use element may have more refined recommendations. The other reason why any recommendations are very important, and also goals and objectives generally, but particularly the recommendations, is all zoning. I know I said all zoning has to be consistent, master plan, particularly when it comes to zone boundaries and intensity of uses. Those are really supposed to be in the master plan. So for example, one of the recommendations that I will get to later, and I'm going to go through all of them, but just to give you like for example, is like the B2 zone doesn't really exist anymore. It's very limited. Most of it is just around on Bordentown Avenue. It's really been replaced by the B4 zone, essentially where it had existed. So, yeah.
Just so B2 is what zone?
Yeah, so B2 is the general business zone. And like I said, right now, it pretty much only exists on Bordentown Avenue. And a lot of it was replaced by the B4 zone, which is the general village / business zone. And that has pockets on Main Street. But like that is an example of a zoning change that would need to be in the master plan in order for that zone boundary to be moved or potentially eliminated. Things like that, like rezonings, do need to be in the master plan. So to the extent of how specific they need to be, like that's another matter. There is some flexibility in that, but if there is any consideration of moving zone boundaries, rezoning properties, all of that should really be in the master plan, whether it's in the master plan reexamination report, or if it ends up, we get to it later in the land use element, it does need to be there. There may also be some overlap where we're doing the master plan re-exam now and it is more general. And then, like I said, we refine it down to be more specific when we get to the land use element.
If I may, I'm looking at goal 3.
Yeah.
To encourage and promote and improve visual environment and the preservation of natural systems and environmentally sensitive areas.
Mhm.
I'm a class 2 designee here, so I do represent the Environmental Commission, and I wanted to just ask if there is any sort of stronger or firmer language, or if I'm misreading this, any language at all that could be added here that would talk about the need to support our tree bank, right? When places are coming in to be able to contribute. To the chairman's point, we hear quite a bit about.
Can you go back a little bit? Because I missed what you said. Can we encourage?
I'm a dad. I'm used to sort of speaking very, very quickly.
Okay.
I apologize. I would like to see some language that expresses, because I don't see it here and maybe it's later,
Mhm.
our commitment as a planning board to ensure that when places are given approval, that the commitment to the tree bank is clear and expressly communicated. I don't see that here. I do see that the goal is to have a focus on natural systems and environmentally sensitive areas. I see that sort of expressing itself as it relates to the river, but not necessarily to our trees.
Mhm.
And I do hear lots and lots of residents have that as an issue, and it's understandable. So I'd like to know if there's a way for us to add an objective in that section that would speak to that more specifically.
Yes. So my first question, is it just that commitments to the tree bank need to be clear, or that more preservation of trees should occur, or both?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. 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 So what I would say, and this is a very off the cuff thing, so when you get the draft later and you're like, that's not what you said. I think things like preserving trees is an appropriate objective. Prior to this meeting, I have not looked at the tree regulations of Saraville, particularly as it pertains to if there's tree substitution requirements, paying into the tree fund. So I think generally preserving trees is an objective. Depending on the language of the ordinance as it currently exists, that may be a recommendation. Okay.
I can just comment quickly on the tree ordinance. Every application that comes to this board, that tree ordinance is required to be met. They have to go through and follow the ordinance as far as designation of trees, compliance. The only time this board has waived that requirement is when it was part of a settlement agreement, not negotiated by this board, but possibly by the mayor and council, like the affordable housing as an example. They were not required to comply with the tree bank requirements. That wasn't this board's decision. It was done as a settlement agreement. So when they come before you, they're already bound saying that they don't have to comply. So any other application, this board has not waived that requirement unless it's been waived by someone
That's
else.
part of your checklist that you go through during the
Exactly,
application
every
process too.
application, correct. We make sure.
Understood. No,
make sure it's
understood.
complied with.
And I can appreciate that. What I would like to see is that in writing to express that is a
Recommendation.
goal and an objective and part of our fundamental commitment to the place that we are situated.
Okay, so I think we were on goal 4. Yes. Okay.
Being that, would analysis as well be an objective, especially in the conversation of trees preservation? That's also language that I don't necessarily see, but
Yeah, so things like analysis and evaluation usually end up in recommendations,
again,
because goals are just like, these are the things that we want, and the recommendations are these are the things that you should do. So our goal could be to preserve trees. A recommendation could be to evaluate if the current tree ordinance is sufficient, or like just go through if that process is. So that's similar to, yeah, that usually makes sense, the recommendations, the analyze, the evaluate, like those are the action items that we're doing. So goal 4 is to encourage the maintenance of existing business community and provide for desirable new commercial development. So then the first objective is develop a growth strategy to properly position the borough in regard to anticipated regional and county growth. Oh, I did go through this one. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We were jumping around a little bit, so I kind of lost where I was. Yes. Plan and implement the expansion and improvement of community facilities and programs consistent with the stable revenue base. Plan and implement improvements to the borough senior facility. Continue to encourage and promote, expand recycling programs and goals. Encourage and continue to promote establishment of open space and enhancement of existing park facilities.
Did we go over 5 today? 5 has to do with.
Okay. Sorry,
And
I
my
heard.
question is, in terms of educational, given that the Board of Education is a separate entity that
Mhm.
we have jurisdiction over, how does this play?
So that does get very challenging because when it is separate, sometimes there are instances where there's certain crossover programs. Like for example, like recreation departments may sometimes partner with schools. Things like extracurriculars that partner with schools as well. But you are right, it does get very difficult when you have separate entities. But it also prevents an opportunity to like encourage partnerships.
Well, let me ask you this, if the planning board is allowed to issue a recommendation on where this new transportation center is gonna be, is that something that you could evaluate, the firm would evaluate? Based upon the overall objectives that we're talking about here, where would be the appropriate location for this transportation depot?
Yeah, the school bus depot. Yeah, that's something that could come up. Like I said, when we're dealing with school boards, it does get a little bit complicated, but there could be recommendations of like where the most appropriate place would be, things of that nature.
My question is for 5, 6, and 7 together. When you have larger developments, how do we ensure that we're not harshly negatively impacted by the development, and we're going to need schools, we're going to need better roads, we're going to need better transportation because of these developments that are coming in. Obviously, if they meet their criteria or whatever it is, they are allowed to build the community. But how do you protect and ensure that we have the schools that to meet their needs of their development? My understanding is that we weren't able to dictate or ask for, unless it was a settlement for a school or expansion of a school. But is there something in the master plan that we could do or wording and that we could add to help direct builders when these things are going to be a need?
So yes and no. And what I mean by that is things like evaluating what changes will be needed because of the changes in population, essentially coming up with that list. There was also a change in the municipal land use law that even deals with things like performance bonds, where you're essentially limited to things located in the right of way. And potentially on adjacent properties if it's within buffer zones. But I will disclaimer that inclusionary housing projects are different, and it is something that the municipality is going to have to deal with, but I don't know that this document is necessarily the one for it. And I know that's probably not the answer that you wanted to hear, but
No,
I
It's an
know.
answer. I mean, it's the answer. It's not
Yeah.
the one I wanted.
I know,
because
but
I know
I also could have lied to you and been like, we're gonna fix it.
that's not what we hired you.
Absolutely. But like I said, it is different. But that is when I also said that in addition to going over the goals and objectives and general policies, we can also outline what problems and issues are. That our population is going to be changing, that we're going to need to evaluate what this impact is. For example, are these projects actually going to produce school children? There's plenty of studies that say they do. There's a lot of studies that say that they don't. So I think that is an opportunity for exploration. But you are right, when these projects come in, you can't necessarily like ask for a new fire truck or ask for a new school. Like those are not really things that come up in that process because they're not allowed to.
Even if it's in the master plan in any form.
No. I know that's not the answer that you wanted, but I'm also not going to stand up here and lie to you either.
I feel like keep on asking for that. the opportunity.
I think it's a great point. And I think the one common area we might consider is from the awareness standpoint, because a lot of, I say a lot, but I think a decent amount of the complaints that we get that we eventually now conduct research and analysis on does begin with, our residents, those who are on the front lines, right?
Mhm.
When they feel the impact, it's their voice that we hear. And I think in recent times, we've discovered that from our residents that they're not aware in time. And I think, some of the solutions that we receive back from our residents is at least having signs available in at least present on large applications before any adjustments are done. And at least that can allow our residents to be aware and bring questions. And if there now needs to be certain studies to be done, it can lead to that in advance. So is there any language that we can create where, there has to be signs or just items for more awareness? Is that?
I think we can recommend a policy that generally encourages awareness of applications that come in, and whether or not that's like modifying what the planning and zoning board homepage is.
Oh, I mean, like signs, like as in someone walking
Oh.
down and they see something is going on and they know this, how it will impact them. They can see it in advance. They, maybe before structures are built or developed.
Okay, so do you mean, for example, because I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So you
Mm.
mean, for example, I have a building, I'm going to be a planning board applicant. I have intentions to do this, that I have to at least like post some type of notice on my door. So then if you're walking by, you're like, oh, what's this notice say? Turns out they're going to be at the planning board in a month.
Right. Maybe now if they know how that will affect their traffic circulation, they a lot of times those on the front lines would consider how it'll impact them. And that now eventually leads to the intelligence of creating the analysis and the evaluation. It usually begins from those who live it, the residents, so if they're made aware too late, it now leads to a dangerous cycle, right? So I think the one common area where we can really improve from what the vice chair is bringing up is maybe if we create language towards awareness first, and then hopefully that will trickle into an appropriate solution.
And I think also, like was said, adding to our website and notifications on applications that are coming before the boards and our board anyway. And the applications, getting them uploaded onto the website so people can actually see what the plan is.
So true.
Right.
Website, I agree.
That's something that we
Technology
can do,
for
not
sure.
part of this.
I think the complication is that we don't have a person who can sit on Facebook and post in the community groups, right? And that's ultimately what we need. We need someone who is going to be able to have those kinds of conversations in the places where people live.
Right, but at minimum, if we have an application, have it sent to us electronically, we can upload that quickly. The IT can upload that quickly on our website. And the people who go on those websites would be our voice.
Yeah.
Sure. I think that's great. I think the shared commitment is increased transparency, increased communication. So yeah, anything that lends itself to the work being done out loud, I think is a good thing for us as a borough.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to the Mount Laurel. One of the worst things when I was on council, I was there for the Mount Laurel debacle, and I was very vocal against our attorney and the planner at the time, was that the planning board wasn't going along with the Mount Laurel decision and was just not allowing it. And it came before the council. And now we're getting all these homes that we have no say over. That's going to impact our schools, our roads, every part of our town. And there was nothing we could do at that point.
It's already
It was very frustrating. So I want to make sure that as a member of this board, we do follow the laws and case law out there. For not just now, there's no board member on here that was a part of the Mount Laurel issues. But going forward, we're not going to be here. So the next group that is here, making sure that they're following the current laws and case studies.
And I think it goes beyond just the third, I thought we were under court order to provide a certain number of units.
Yeah.
That's part of the settlement agreement I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
You now have an obligation that's been approved And I think what Lee's indicated is that that is valid for another couple of years. And then there's going to be another round that you'll have to go through and
Yeah.
deal with. But you now have ordinances in place to address commercial developments making contributions to affordable housing. And any new development coming in, you're addressing affordable housing. I think that's
Yeah.
part of the plan that was approved.
Yeah, and that is usually how these settlement agreements and housing elements work is technically speaking, and it has to be in accordance with your settlement agreement. So like if in the settlement agreement, you said that this property was going to be used for X, what you're required to do in this round is you have to create the opportunity. So what I mean is if there was a developer and a subject property came up and, say they had financing problems, like they had financing problems or their schedule moved and, they have all these projects in their places. If they didn't move on it by 2025, it's a different issue because what you're really supposed to do is create the opportunity. And that's also what's going to come up when you do the next round. But that is going to be a separate thing. In terms of notice and awareness, I wrote it down. I am going to have to look into it just because there are a lot of notice laws. So we always have to just make sure that we're consistent with and do not conflict with. But I do understand your point because I have seen it happen with planning board meetings where someone ends up coming to the next meeting with their little like certified mail thing. And they're like, I got this. And we have to let them know like, well, you're still within the 45-day appeal period. But they'll say like, but I didn't get it. And we have to explain to them like per the law, like they followed the law. Like we have the slips, we know they sent it. If the post office didn't get it to you, like that's not the applicant's fault, but just so you know, there is a 45-day appeal period and you can go through that. But I understand what you're saying, that you don't want it to get to that point. You don't want people to come with their certified mail slip saying, I got this, where's the application? This letter said it was last month, but I just got this 2 days ago. But what I'm saying, we just have to make sure we're consistent because we can't conflict with that. So I know I had skipped goal 5. Encourage the provision of cost-effective expansion of educational facilities and cultural facilities. Encourage the provision of cost-effective expansion. Oh, it says it twice. Encourage the appropriate multi-use development, which would provide potential for shared uses of infrastructure elements and promote the coordination of cultural facilities with Middlesex County. And I know I'd skipped ahead to 6.
May I ask a question on 5?
Sure.
I'm asking for a friend who could not be here tonight. I see that there is an encouragement of the provision of cost-effective expansion of educational and cultural facilities. Is it appropriate for us as a planning board to weigh in and promote? Ask the question without asking the question. Get some smiles. Is there a way for us to welcome folks of lots of different cultures through our role on the planning board in our contributions to the master plan to encourage Sayreville to continue to grow in its diversity? And I see provision of cost-effective expansion of cultural facilities. I don't know if there's something that is either more broad or more specific that we as a board could put there. We have had a tremendous outpouring of communication from lots of community members in our town within the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And that enthusiasm and that vigor is something that I think we should continue to encourage if possible and appropriate.
Okay, so generally places that are open to everyone and that it's encouraged that all residents of all walks come there.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Creating continuing to create a Sayreville for all
Okay,
through our specific adoptions of whatever verbiage you need to put in that spot.
yeah,
Correct. A lot of community members that are going through some adjustment and zoning issues and don't necessarily have a place to go in the interim while that sorts itself out through the appropriate channels.
okay,
So
I'm gonna try.
all we can ask. Thank you.
Um, All right. So now we're on to 7. Plan and implement the improvement of circulation and transportation facilities and other infrastructure elements consistent with a stable revenue base. To continue to coordinate the borough sidewalk and bikeway plan with Middlesex County's bike plan. I think there was actually an accident in there that it says further discussion with subcommittee and borough engineer. So is that still valid? Does that need to be strengthened? It is my understanding that the borough does not actually have a sidewalk and bikeway plan currently. So perhaps it's that one should be created that is consistent with Middlesex County.
You have a policy concerning curb and sidewalk. As far as a specific bikeway plan, you don't have a plan that calls for constructing bikeway in certain areas. So that possibly could be a recommendation if that's what the board would like to see.
I just wanted to put that out there before we said that it's valid, that we all know that there is none. Yeah. So another example of like how this could be modified is that it also loops into like walking paths that exist. Because sidewalks are typically located within the right of way. Obviously, like when they're larger properties, they do exist. Like even here in Borough Hall, the sidewalk goes around connecting the parking lot to the main street. But things like connecting to other paths that may exist as well is also a way to strengthen that.
I don't know that we finished 6. I think we were starting 6 and jumped
Okay.
back to 5.
Okay.
If we could just.
Plan and implement the expansion and improvement of community facilities and programs consistent with a stable revenue base. Plan and implement improvements to the borough senior facility. Continue to encourage and promote expanded recycling programs and goals. Encourage and continue to promote the establishment of open space and enhancement of existing park facilities. So if all of those are still valid, a potential update we would give is if like some improvements were given to the senior facility, but there's still outstanding items. Generally speaking, like those can also count as updates. Like we updated this park in this way. It is our hope to then move on to improvements to this other park. The borough recently acquired a new property to use as a park. Those are also all appropriate updates.
I know for years we've been going back and forth about a rec facility. I don't know where we are at this point in the council's version of it, but could we add that as part of the
Yeah,
goal?
yeah.
When you say rec,
Not just
facility,
senior recreation altogether.
like a community
It could
center.
be a community, it could be recreation, all forms of recreation, not just sports, the theater, arts. Like all recreation, open to all people.
And if I may comment from a council standpoint, I think it's so far that the mayor's vision to not pursue that until after the election. So that such a large project should be.
Well, yeah, and it was kicked down the road 15 years ago when I first got on council, so it just keeps on getting kicked down the road. So that's why I want to make it a goal, because everyone makes it a political issue, and if we could put it in our goals, then it's something that's said so that it is a priority for us.
So true. Thank you.
Yeah, we can add that as an objective under goal 6 or modify the wording of goal 6, maybe a combination of both. So then goal 8, to plan and implement budget and financial programs to encourage achievement of goals and objectives, as well as a stable revenue base. So this is kind of like the summary of all of the above. Establish and maintain a viable capital improvements program and budget. Establish procedures for evaluating fiscal impacts, alternative development proposals, Consider the possibility of special improvement districts to finance major infrastructure improvements in defined areas and encourage maximum participation in available state and federal programs. I just want to touch on what a special improvement district is. It's essentially a delineated area, typically as of a commercial area. And essentially, it's an area where those who are within it pay into the special improvement district, and that along with other funds helps facilitate potential improvements. So for example, if there's like a very strong downtown core, the special improvement district will also be visually differentiated, sometimes by like decorative pavement or decorative street lighting. So it's not saying that they have to, because it's also up to the businesses who are on that street, whether or not they want to participate. But I just want to clarify what a special improvement district is. So when you go to other communities and you notice that, on this one street, they have these like interesting lights and the garbage cans are branded, you're probably in a special improvement district if those are the things that you see.
That's similar to the business districts where the
Yes.
business all chip in money and
Yes,
grade them each other.
yes, special improvement districts and business improvement districts are very similar. Okay, so next I wanted to really go into what the big issues are. I do want to throw out a couple of recommendations that I had just to kind of get the ball rolling of also examples of recommendations and to also see the board's feedback of them. So I do want to be clear, I'm just starting with these to get the ball rolling, but I do want to hear from all of you. But sometimes it's easier if I start. So one of the recommendations that we have is evaluating the existing definitions that exist to see if there's any common land uses that are not previously included in the ordinance. And this is going to relate to potential use recommendations that we have. That one, if you're going to introduce a use, you do need to define it. And the other thing is when use definitions are missing, sometimes it can create confusion. So if, for example, there's a use that the municipality doesn't actually want, but it isn't defined as separate of a use that is permitted, if that makes sense at all. Like if you don't, yeah. So for example,
2013 and now it's a hot button issue.
yeah, so it's like having a definition for that, where then it's like, because so Sayreville has already opted out, right? But so by having a definition, it indicates like, this is the thing that is not allowed. Another example is, and I'm going to kind of loop into it because it's also one of our recommended addition of uses, is so right now, animal daycare and grooming is not permitted anywhere in Sayreville, and this is a use that has become much more popular. Just like we talked about changing trends, people are a lot more into their pets. And there is a demand for animal daycares and pet grooming that seems to have exploded. So an example would be, we're okay with animal daycare. And again, this is also with feedback from all of you, like we're okay with animal daycare, but we are not okay with kennels. And kennels per the state definition of the Department of Health includes boarding, breeding, selling. It encompasses a whole thing. So by having definitions of both, then there's no confusion of like, okay, we are okay with an animal daycare, but this other business is coming in and we don't have a definition for it. Does this actually meet up? When you have definitions for both, when that business comes in, it's where we can say, one, you don't meet the definition of animal daycare, because per our definition, it says that you cannot house animals for a period more than 24 hours. And also if they're doing other things, they can say, you meet this other definition, like really that's what you are. So that would be an example of providing definitions for both things that you want and things that you don't want. So then there is some differentiation that exists. And similarly, like if you're okay with breweries, but you're not okay with a brew pub, generally speaking, if someone's okay with a brewery, they're also okay with a brew pub, but that is just for example, it creates that distance and clear demarcation. So one of our recommendations is to add new definitions that are not currently included in the ordinance. And again, some of them are going to relate to uses that are also recommended. So that includes things like adult education. Adult education would include things like vocational schools, generally speaking, classes for adults that are not like full college curriculums. That is not something that is currently permitted in Sayreville. It is a missing use, and there is demand for it. So that would be filling a hole of what is provided here. Also, animal daycare and grooming, like I said. The other thing is, while auto sales are permitted in Sayreville, auto rental is not. So that's also, again, with like definitions and like what does it fall into? Because it could be very difficult if someone comes in for a like a, oh my goodness, I'm like enterprise. Yes, thank you. I was like, someone comes in for an enterprise and they submit a zoning application. And it's like, is that the same as auto sales? Not really, because they have to return it, but then they don't even have to return it to this location. They can return it because they're driving across the country and it's really going to be in California. So it's things like that. Also brew pubs and breweries, community and community centers, community gardens, adding uses like that. And personal service is not currently in the ordinance, and personal service, typically speaking, relates to anything that is for their person or their wares is generally the term. So things like shoe repair, dry cleaners, tailors, that falls under personal service. And at the same time, so it is like a barber shop or like a eyebrow threading or like waxing establishment, things that are needed for me or my stuff, for lack of a better term. And that's also why it's nice to differentiate, because if personal service is permitted, but things like animal grooming isn't permitted, then you kind of get into questions of like, well, like, is animal grooming personal service? Like, is my dog like my shoe that I'm trying to fix? Like, no, it's something different. Like, it has Department of Health implications. Another example of a recommendation that we have that I had already stated is eliminating the B2 zone, because it doesn't really exist anymore. Most of it was replaced by the B4, and essentially taking, and that's the general business zone, and taking the remaining area that's on Bordentown Avenue and rezoning that as highway business. Another thing that's kind of a cleanup is the professional office zone doesn't exist. It was also consumed by the B4 zone. And, oh, sorry, the B2 zone was also replaced by somewhat by the B3. But the professional office zone doesn't exist anymore. So that's kind of like a cleanup item, because the section still exists in the ordinance, and that kind of gets confusing because it's not there. And similarly, the SED2 zone, despite the letters, that's actually the office/business zone. And that was replaced by the Fulton's Landing redevelopment area. So things like that are providing cleanup, because if those zones don't exist, those use requirements and bulk requirements don't really need to be in the ordinance anymore. Another example is things like having a flood hazard overlay. This would align with the existing like mapped flood hazard areas. And in this area, it would be that there is a lower threshold for impervious coverage. So for example, if you have two properties that are in the B2 zone, the one that's in the flood hazard overlay area wouldn't be permitted to provide as much impervious coverage as a property that's in the B2 zone that's outside of the flood zone area. Another recommendation is to add design standards for green building and sustainability. It's my understanding that a lot of these things have been encouraged or required as conditions of approval of board applications already. Like this is a practice that the board is doing, but this would essentially be codifying it. It would create design standards that require things like water efficiency, solar roofs, cool roofs, green roofs. It could be stipulated if it's required for some properties more than others. So for example, if you have like a very large flat roof, that would be very conducive to having a cool roof. Cool roofs are essentially the ones that are painted white, so they reflect the sun instead of absorbing the sun. And so then they don't have to use as much like air conditioning because the building itself isn't getting as hot. Another recommendation is just doing general cleanup in terms of how it aligns with state laws. So for example, like I had said before, the performance and maintenance guarantees section of the ordinance should be updated because in 2017, the state law changed and it limited like the nature and where these maintenance guarantees could apply. Another example is electric vehicle charging stations. As I said earlier, now there are state requirements that based on what type of use it is and how many parking spaces exist. So if you have like a 25 space lot, then this many need to be EV ready, make ready, or this many need to be active now. Things like that are helpful to just have in the ordinance because it prevents things from falling through the cracks. Because even though technically there's state laws, county laws, local laws, if you just have someone who doesn't know, not everyone's an expert on land use law. And what I partially mean by that is you have an applicant who's coming in and, you know, they did their pro forma. They're like, this is my project. I'm coming to Sayreville. Like, let's do it. And then they get to the board and then your board professionals point out like, well, per this legislation, 5 of these parking spaces need to be like electric vehicle charging spaces now. And then an additional 10 need to be make ready. And then they're kind of like, well, now you've kind of messed up my financial plan because I did not account for having to include this type of infrastructure. And this may even be someone who in advance, they looked at your ordinance. They're like, okay, I know my bulk coverage. I changed my layout because my impervious was slightly over. I don't want to have the variance. Like I accounted for all these things. And then they get here and they're like, oh my goodness, I did not realize I had to have this. And that is also something because it's a state law. You as the board do not have the authority to grant a variance. So someone can't come to you and say, I would like a variance to not provide these 5 spaces. Like, if you say yes, like you may say yes, but when push comes to shove, if someone from the DCA ever comes to check, like you do not have that authority. So things like that, I always find are helpful to have in the ordinance because it also just generally provides clarification of what people know they can and cannot do. So.
Can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Since it was brought up, the cannabis, I know that the borough had opted out, but we should have something on the books, I believe, that in case the borough does decide to opt in down the road, if that's an ability, that we have something in place for the definition and where it can and can't be. Are we permitted to do that?
That's a little bit difficult. So adding with definitions of what things are, like that, of course, we can do. But we can provide guidance. So like I said, like it is recommended that should at some point the governing body decide that they would like to permit this use, that they limit it to these classes or that it's not within residential neighborhoods. Like if they're going to do this, that they should be conscious of the location of schools, location of single family homes, or if they're going to have a provision that it can't be within X amount of feet of residential properties, that includes multifamily properties, not just single family homes. So we can provide guidance, but it's like a little touchy, but we can definitely provide places where things are preferred and where they're not.
Highway
preferred.
district.
Yeah.
That's where you see them now.
Yeah.
Don't want them near residential, near schools.
Yeah. And like things that should be, yeah. So it's like, we don't want them near residential or schools. Consideration of that, if this is going to be something that's permitted, that it should be on roadways that can accommodate that type of traffic. Yeah,
And not to say that this council, but this is a 10-year plan, so it may change. The thought process of it might change with people as well.
yeah. I think the way that we can definitely frame it is that if this were to change, things that need to be considered,
Yes,
if doing the change,
yes.
these are things that should be considered.
I don't know if they'll be afraid that if they do change their mind, someone will come in and scoop up to get a permit and build it anywhere.
So if they change their mind, they are going to have to change their zoning. So say the council says, you know what, we're okay with the cultivation. They can't just like pass a resolution that says cultivation's okay by us. They would need to look at their zoning and say, cultivation is okay in this place.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and they may even make the decision that it should be a conditional use versus a principal permitted use. The nature of conditional uses is essentially that they need to go to a board no matter what. So a conditional use is permitted subject to A, B, and C. If they check all the boxes of A, B, and C, they have to come to the planning board and essentially demonstrate, this is how we meet A, B, and C. Like, this is how we meet each requirement. If they do not meet one of those requirements, then they need to go to the zoning board of adjustment and get a D3 variance and say like, we do not meet this condition, and they have to give, it's the job of their professionals to give the variance testimony.
Woodbridge, the next closest municipality,
Yes,
and their dispensary is on Route 1.
Yes.
Major one.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
where the Garden
I
State
think the
one.
next closest in around here is, I think Lawrence on Route 1.
Lawrence, yeah. All right, Toys R Us, yeah.
Okay. Some other recommendations are adding certain uses to the B1 neighborhood zone. That's essentially pockets of Washington Road. And that includes some of the ones I mentioned earlier, the adult education, animal daycare, community centers and gardens, and personal service. For the B3 zone, that's the highway business zone. That's essentially Route 9, 35. And when I say these, I do mean like portions thereof. Not the full stretch, Raritan Avenue, and whether those would be places that would be appropriate for brew pubs and breweries, adding rental to the auto sales, like I'd mentioned before, garden centers / nurseries, medical offices, and indoor recreation facilities. That can be things like rock walls, like the axe throwing. And that's the other thing too. If we're going to add indoor recreational facilities, we should make sure that the definition is appropriate for what we actually want. And then for the B4, that's the General Village Business District. That's primarily located on Main Street, adding medical offices and financial institutions as permitted uses. But those are just recommendations. Of course, that's the sport's decision of adding uses, intensity, locations. So I was wondering if there are other problems, issues, recommendations that would like to be noted by the planning board in the plan.
Before recommendations in the new plan, as it doesn't exist in the previous one. No?
Do you mean that because it doesn't exist in the ordinance?
Yeah, or, well, I'm just saying in general, I don't really see any language for before. Am I missing that? What am I missing here?
So what we went through were generally the goals and objectives.
Mhm.
There were some recommendations that were included in the land use element. Some of them have been moved on and some of them have not. So for example, on LI 15, one of the recommendations is reclassify the majority of the heavy industrial land use classification and create a new light industrial classification. Like, it's my understanding that that is an example of one that has been done.
Trying to get to that page right now. You said
LI 15.
Oh, is that a LI? Wait, what?
I thought it said LI. Is that a?
I'm gonna go with LU. Right, that was the page I was on, right? So I see it go from B1 to B2 to B3, but no language on B4. Yeah,
Yeah.
am I missing something?
So there is now a B4 zone.
Okay, so it's gonna be added for the new.
Yeah. So
Just want to clarify.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is also what makes doing these like sometimes a little bit difficult because like some recommendations have been done, some haven't been. Since this was done, certain zones are created that didn't exist before. The B4 now exists, and that's part of why it was not discussed in the 2013 because it was not
And-
present.
Since we're on that, there's supposed to be an LU 16? Sorry again. I was doing a lot, so just clarifying again. Thank you.
How about urging R7s or R10s opposed to R5s? The recommendation,
Sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear what you said.
urging to go to R7 or R10 rather than R5 for any kind of building? Larger lots.
So are you saying increase the minimum lot area? Okay. We can examine if that's appropriate, but sometimes what's difficult about that is we already have a lot of properties within these zones that don't meet the requirements. And essentially, we're kind of at the point of a lot of the development that exists. So when we do something like something where I was in an R5 zone and I had a fully conforming lot. And now we've increased the minimum lot area, but everywhere around me has homes on it. None of these people want to sell me their house. We're essentially creating a hardship for those people. And that's something that we're creating.
It's pre-existing, isn't it? Would it matter?
Yeah, it
It's
would
on the
only then
property?
really come, so that's why I said we have to like look at it, because the only time it would really come into play is for subdivisions. But otherwise, like I said, because if we're, typically when we're changing the minimum lot area, then we're also creating adjustments to the other bulk standards. So typically, even though in a lot of cases, even though we're increasing the minimum lot area, there's really still like an ideal amount of building square footage or impervious coverage that we want to have. So if we increase the lot area, and it's not always this way, like every town is different, but there are examples of we're increasing the lot area, which means that now we actually have to decrease the building coverage because we don't actually want the houses to get bigger. We just want them to be further apart. And that's why we're increasing the area. So when we then do that, we're increasing the minimum lot area, we're decreasing the building coverage. We are putting some people in a position where it's going to be difficult for them to make any improvements to their home. So if like they want to add like a back patio, and in the old R5 standards, they could totally have that little back patio. It was still far away from their neighbors. They have their grill, they have their whole setup, because then we shrunk the numbers and we shrunk the lot coverage and we increased the lot area. They're left with a very small box that they can do things, because like right now they're already over what it is. And it may be, and that's also why I say we have to evaluate, because what's out there may already be modest. Like we end up looking at it and we're like, oh man, like they really just have that patio back there. It's not like they have a whole crazy situation where it almost looks like the wildest Airbnb that you've ever been to, or Verbo, where they have all the bells and whistles because it was really designed to be someone's vacation home. So we can,
I was just thinking because somebody might come in and look to rezone an area. If we have it where we're urging R7s, R10s, or if somebody comes in and buys a couple homes and they want to build condos on them.
so when you say
Getting they have to have larger lots per unit.
So when you say condo, do you mean like townhouses or apartments?
I'm just in multi-units.
Okay. So in those instances, if someone's in one of those zones, it would be more appropriate to look at the use. So the minimum lot area wouldn't necessarily come into play if someone's getting a use variance, because the use in itself isn't allowed. So that would be the bigger problem than actually the lot area. Do you know what I mean? Because if they're not allowed to do it, if we just increase the lot area, then we could potentially, and I do say potentially, because again, like we should always just look at these things first before definitively saying yes or no. If the concern is having condos come into one of these zones and they're going to need a use variance, and that's what our goal is to avoid, while doing that, we may inadvertently negatively impact single-family homeowners. So that's just something to be careful of. It's what is the thing that we're actually trying to protect or prevent happen or encourage to happen.
I can weigh in a little bit on the R5 question, because that was an issue that this board dealt with years ago. President Park, as an example, was built with 50 by 100 lots. At one point was in an R7 zone. So requirement was a 7,500 square foot lot. Everybody had 50 by 100 square foot lots. So anytime anybody wanted to do something on their property, they had to get a variance. They didn't meet the requirements. They didn't have the required lot width for setbacks. So what the board did was they went back and looked at the areas that originally were developed with the R5, put them back in the R5, to prevent the residents from having to go through the exercise of getting the variance. Most of those areas were developed. So it wasn't like you took vacant land and said, we want 50 by 100 lots. We were taking properties that were developed by 50 by 100 lots, putting them back in a zone that allowed 50 by 100 lots. So you didn't impact the residents.
Gotcha.
I think if there's areas that are vacant and you want to have larger lot sizes, maybe that's a recommendation, is that you
Yeah,
take vacant properties that might.
That makes
be-
more, that makes sense to me. I understand that. And going to zoning, you have to go to zoning every time you want to do anything. Because they're not conforming.
Okay, so I'm adding a note of look at vacant land areas and evaluate what appropriate potential lot sizes and other development would be. Are there any other issues that you've noticed either as a planning board member or a resident just driving around Sayreville, or, and this also includes like, so I know I talked about like problems and issues that occur, but this section can also be aspirational of things that we wish that we had that we don't. Like I said, as an example earlier, like if applications come in and like the board doesn't think that the buffering is really appropriate, but they follow the ordinance, things like that. Of that nature, generally.
I think from my standpoint, and maybe correct me if it's not appropriate for this, a lot of the feedback we get is, more from an aspiration standpoint, right? More cost-effective walkable areas and cost-effective road improvements. Is a lot of the feedback we get. So,
Do you mean like the cost of replacing sidewalks?
I don't know if it's replace or improve, but just, a lot of times the reason, I think the challenges for walkable areas and, drivable roads is from a cost standpoint. So I guess the aspiration is cost effective, drivable roads and walkable or sidewalkables.
That makes sense. And I think that even loops back to one of the goals or objectives that was encouraging, exploring essentially like any grant opportunity that's provided, like DOT has grant programs for roadway improvements, sidewalks, et cetera, et cetera. They can be very competitive, but just acknowledging that they exist and pursuing them when they can. I know another practice that is already being implemented by your professionals And this is something that wouldn't necessarily be an ordinance thing, but that when large development projects come in, even not necessarily like large development projects, but development projects in general, that there are improvements made to the right of way. So if I'm putting in a new building, tearing down a building, putting in a new one, and the sidewalk in front is pretty messed up, it's cracked, there's all of that, that part of their application is that they have to replace the sidewalk. So I think like that's a practice that should be encouraged to continue. And I know it's not exactly what you were saying, but I think that does loop into like cost effective, where it's like if they're coming in and they're making these improvements, they should also be addressing the sidewalk, particularly because in certain instances, if they have to do like utility work and they're like digging up the road, they're digging up the sidewalk, that they also have to replace it.
And you would say that would be more primarily for the large or like medium to large applications.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's something that you wouldn't necessarily do for, and the planning board doesn't get single family homeowner applications, but I'm just saying like, for example, like if the sidewalk in front of a single family homeowner's house is fine, like you wouldn't do a condition of approval, like you have to replace the sidewalk. But if you're having a new commercial building go in, it's going to be an office building and the sidewalk is looking a little worse for wear, that part of their application includes that they have to fix the sidewalk and replace it.
I think the board's policy has been to address it on all applications, even for minor subdivision, might be 2 single-family houses. You'll
Yeah.
look at the curb and the sidewalk, does it need to be upgraded? Ordinance requires sidewalk. If the residents don't want to put it in, you can grant the waiver. You'll typically look at the surrounding area. If there's no sidewalks, you'll grant the waiver.
Yeah.
People have sidewalks, they'll be required to put it in.
Yeah, that's what I meant, like, for the applications that don't even come to this board, like,
Mm.
I want to put a deck on the back of my house and I slightly encroach into the rear yard setback. But for, okay, are there any other issues?
I don't know if this is appropriate for your study, but there are certain areas of our town that lose power more than others. Is there any way to look at why that's the case and ways to improve the electricity infrastructure in towns? I mean, there's certain areas that, you know, the wind blows bad one day and the power's out and takes forever. I don't know if that's a zoning planning issue, but and I know some towns have their own in-house people as opposed to relying on JCP&L, which can be notoriously, I don't want to say lazy, but it takes a while to get it back up. And some towns have their own electric authority. And I don't know if we're that big, but I think Milltown does.
And
It's South River.
South River. Is that possible to, you know, aspirational, so we don't have to rely on JCP&L when a quarter of the borough is out of electricity?
I think we can definitely recommend looking into the existing infrastructure, not just of roads and sidewalks, but power as well. And just determining, generally looking into like, why is it this way? Can it be fixed? And kind of doing things like, for example, not necessarily being like, we need to have our own electric authority, but just like listing potential conversations that can occur.
Aspirational, I guess, we hear, I think the chairman started very appropriately saying that I think a lot of times we get the blame for projects that residents don't want, right? And I wish that we had the power to sit here and approve things we liked or didn't like. It's not our charge. However, we are able to add conditions of approval. I went through a litany of conditions of approval with a prior project. And so I'm wondering that, you know, deforestation and displacement of animal and wildlife has been a big concern for our residents, but traffic is also. And there are some things that were pointed out this week. Some things are worth waiting in traffic for, right? We have to have schools and Washington Road's going to back up. You just have to deal with it. For a business to come in and negatively impact residents, we were previously able to get several conditions of approval on an application. The place had to provide signage that said right turn only, no left turns. Is there anything that we can put in that sort of makes that more codified as opposed to us needing to go through every single time. Planning board is incentivized uniquely to care about the way that our town develops and how we take care of the residents who are here. And we hear it all the time, whether you come to this meeting, whether you come to borough council meetings, and council can certainly speak to that. But yeah, I'm wondering what we can do.
So that is interesting. So that was like part of why I brought up like the buffering example. Like if there are things that frequently come up that end up becoming conditions of approval, that's definitely worth evaluating whether or not they should just become part of your zoning ordinance or design standards that at minimum you have to get a waiver. Things like right turn only signage are difficult to codify because it's very property dependent. The other thing that I need to comment on, because I know that a lot of you already said traffic is a concern, and I totally hear you on that. Something to be conscious of is when something is a principal permitted use, you can't really ask for a traffic study. So like, that's not necessarily something that can or can't be added to a checklist. And like, that's something I hear a lot with my boards, you know, like a use will come in and they're like, I want a traffic study. And me and the other professionals have to say like, well, we can ask. They may do it as part of their testimony anyway, because they're trying to ease the night that they're going to have in front of you and they don't want to be here until midnight. But you need to understand that you can't require them to have it if it's a permitted use. And part of the logic behind that is you said it's okay. So if you said this use is okay, that means that everything that comes with it is okay as well. In terms of things like deforestation and things of that nature, potentially adding the requirement for environmental impact studies to be done for applications as like a checklist item. If you are going to update it to include an environmental impact statement, I would encourage that certain things need to be required, because something that I think is always the example of any attorney going over some land use things, explaining the board process is completeness. And if you do not state what has to be in your environmental impact statement, there are some attorneys, and there is a debate that essentially if I write down on my legal pad right now and hand to you like environmental impact statement, there is no impact. But in terms of like completeness, yes, the application is complete. But if you include things like soil studies, or you have to indicate what the increase in impervious coverage is, what is the current number of trees, how many trees are being removed, then if I give you my legal pad of no impact, then it's incomplete because you told me what I'm supposed to provide. And that is something that there are differing legal opinions. Some will say, in what universe would a piece of paper that you wrote no impact count? But then there are others that'll say, you didn't say what was supposed to be in it. They gave it to you. Yeah.
That is currently a checklist requirement. Traffic
Okay.
study, there are requirements,
Okay.
environmental impact are requirements. The issues with traffic that are being discussed tonight don't necessarily relate to a permitted use. It relates to a redevelopment plan.
Okay.
That redevelopment plan had very specific conditions as to what was permitted, what needed to be done with regard to traffic. And I think there was some concern that the board's hands were kind of tied because the ordinance said that these things are permitted in
Yeah.
order to allow this use to take place. And I think there were some misconceptions from the public as to what the board could or couldn't do.
Yeah. So that is also why I think it is so prudent to talk to the planning board, and not just because the master plan is your document, but it's also the understanding of when applications come in, if you have a fully conforming application, you do not have grounds to deny the application. You may decide to vote with your heart, and every single person on the board denies it, and then they appeal it, and then it comes right back. Any denial has to be based on variances and those proofs not being met. And even then, just because a variance is required, if they've met the proof. So like, for example, like if there's a minor subdivision for undersized lots and the planner comes in and right this moment, I cannot quote the court case that like included this precedent. But I can give you the summary of like, if someone comes in and they're doing a minor subdivision and they need variance approval for like a lot depth. And they turn around and they say, every lot on this street has insufficient lot depth. But then the board says, yes, but you don't have the right lot depth. That is also an example of then it comes right back. So like in that instance, they would have met the proofs of there's no property here that has the lot depth, that we would be fully conforming with the character of the neighborhood. But that is also just something to keep in mind. So that's also why I ask, like, if you're seeing patterns of development that you don't like, that we should at least explore why that's happening. Sometimes it's instances of like the FAR is too high or like the building coverage is too high, or things of that nature, where it's the standards also don't match. And like, that's usually what happens. It's that the standards don't match. So you're getting these applications where they meet the FAR, and that's part of why they're with you and not at the zoning board. But then they're able to like go a little bit over on their building coverage, and they're able to provide proofs for why it's okay. So those are just examples. If anyone else has any comments, questions, concerns, issues, problems, aspirations.
I realize I've been here less than 2 hours, but I'm just bringing this up because in South River, they're amending the master plan because of all the Blue Acres properties that were taken over since they had last redone their master plan.
Okay.
And we actually had an application where one guy bought a lot with no condition, surrounded by all Blue Acres property. And he was able to develop it. He ran 300 feet sewer line and everything else because the zone was still an R10 zone. So they're trying to change that to recognize that certain areas of South River that were impacted, that Blue Acres bought out, should only be, the entire area should only be zoned passive recreation, things like that.
So he bought a vacant property?
He bought one that had not been bought out by Blue Acres.
Okay.
Literally, he has an island surrounded
Okay.
by vacant properties. God bless him that he wanted to develop it, but because the old zone had existed, the master plan didn't recognize that as a flood area that had been primarily taken over by Blue Acres. My understanding is there were similar issue.
Yeah.
There is a section that RSRS and for some areas, yeah.
All right, we have similar situation with existing houses, where you have an island. Around the top of the building, but existing house remaining.
And this was worse with the vacant lot, put an elevated house in. Used, but the master plan that came rest rezone.
Yeah, that's definitely something that should be evaluated, and also like if there are any potential consequences, because I understand that flooding has existed for all of time, like, you know, famous floods throughout history. But definitely looking into if they should be rezoned and if that would count as down zoning, if it's surrounded, yeah.
You know, it's recognizing the master plan.
Yeah.
The area that's prone to flooding.
Yeah.
With different design standpoints.
Exactly. And that's why I meant like trying to weigh it, because it may not be that we can carte blanche rezone it for parkland, but if there are design standards or other things to be considered, or at least in the master plan emphasize that these are places that are prone to flooding. So we would discourage development here. Thank you. That's a great example and very relevant because no, I know. That's what I mean. It's impacts of the same flood. I am done.
Can you just give us a brief explanation of what the next step is?
Yes. So the next step is that the master plan re-exam draft will be flushed out partially based on input from tonight, partially, like I said, that it's like updates of state county changes. There does need to be a public hearing for the master plan reexamination report. As stated earlier, other elements are going to be referenced in the master plan reexamination report. For example, the land use element, the housing element. If it makes sense to include a recommendation of a circulation element, open space, and those would come out of this. They're not necessarily going to be done immediately. The land use element is phase 2. The housing element will have to occur in 2025, subject to wherever we are in 2025. With that, there will have to be a public hearing for the master plan re-exam. So even though I'm here with you in public, this is not our public hearing for the plan. It will have to be noticed and there will be a public presentation for it.
Ms. Fleming, can we ask you as the board to provide us with a draft copy?
Yes.
And then with you, have an opportunity to discuss it with you?
Yes.
Before? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And what I would also like to include, like off of that, is I am speaking for myself with this, but that's because I know myself and this is my first night meeting all of you. I, like many people, are what I like to call a marinator. You know, sometimes I hear something and I don't give an answer right away because I just don't know. So if any of you have comments or questions, you can send them to Beth, who can send them to me. What I will say, and I'm sure you've heard this before per the Sunshine Law, you can't talk to each other. So that is my stipulation. Like, we cannot have a planning board email chain with all of you on it where you comment. But if you have comments or questions and you're like, you know what, I totally forgot this development just went in on Urbanston Road or just went in on Bordentown Road, and these are issues, or even this is a project that went in 5 years ago and we didn't think it was going to be a problem and this is what's going on, or even something a bit more positive. So we're not just negative tonight of here was a project that went in, and in their presentation, they went over all these things that they were doing and they weren't required to do them, but it turned out to be a really nice project. And I hope that more projects look that way. Things that you notice about like setbacks in certain communities, like Main Street is more appropriate for a shorter setback, but you know, this neighborhood really has good setbacks and I think that they should be preserved. Those are all topics that you can contact Beth and she'll get it to me and they can be incorporated into a draft. But yes, absolutely, the board can receive a draft. And I should have said that, I'm sorry. The board will receive a draft prior to the public meeting. It's not going to be, we pick a date and then I just show up and Beth sends it to you the Thursday before the meeting and you're like, oh my God, I'm really reading this for the first time. This is not what I told that woman when she came on the 15th. I don't know why she wrote that.
Do you have an anticipated timeline?
I'm hoping to have a solid draft the first week of March. But that might be a little bit aspirational. But that is my intention of what I'm hoping to have it the first week of March. The only thing that may deter that is, since we are doing a land use element and a master plan re-exam very close to each other, my office is trying to figure out if an online survey would be more appropriate for the master plan re-exam or for the land use element. And if it is for the more appropriate to be for the master plan re-exam, then we would need to give time for people to do the survey. It's not really our style to publish a survey and be like, you have 3 days. If you didn't hear about it, too bad. But surveys are really nice, not just because of COVID, but a lot of times people aren't comfortable speaking at public meetings. It also gives, like I said, like a little bit of like a marination period of like questions where you're like, what do I really think about that? I can think about it and I'm going to get back to you. And with write-in sessions, it decreases human error of me of trying to write really quickly and then misquoting people.
Okay, great. Ms. Fleming, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for a very comprehensive presentation and putting up with our questions. And I want to thank the board members too for a very spirited debate on this.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to coming back.
You as well. Hey,
So the next is our next meeting is March 1st. Jay?
Mr. Chairman, you've got an application scheduled for the Rockville site plan. This is 132 townhouse units on the vacant property behind the Costa Verde off of Cross Avenue. You may recall, the board had some discussions about litigation. This is part of the affordable housing settlement, but also there was some litigation that the board was involved with concerning tree removal and infrastructure issues. There was a settlement agreement that was discussed with the board a few months ago, it was finalized, and now that application is ready to come before you. So that'll be on your agenda for the March 1st meeting. There's a lot of history, so I'll provide your board attorney with the settlement agreements and some of the other documents, so he's up to speed.
thank you, Jay.
I'll take a motion to open the public portion. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Hi.
Opposed? Anyone from the public?
Yes, one gentleman has his hand up. Step forward.
We're not online. We're not
Okay.
online.
I was gonna ask Ms. Feinberg about putting seat cushions on those seats out. They didn't look too comfortable, so thank you for putting up with us and
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joseph J. Cups Jr. I am the tax assessor for the Borough of Sayreville, and as far as an address, would use 167 Main Street. I realize it was not the hearing for the planning board, the master plan review, but I would like to make a comment or two at this point. The tax base stabilization. It said that, now the thing to remember about that is in the report, it has some comparisons of the different years rateable basis. There's at least 2 examples in the last 10 years where the rateable base was influenced by things other than what you would typically think. So I would expect that there'd be some caution when the planner does that and the board considers that, because you can take different numbers from different years and come up with the wrong conclusions. On LU3, there's existing land use, 2012. This is one of my pet peeves over the last 10 years or so. Yes, the records did come up with that number of 9,338 acres, which is 14.6 square miles. But there's at least 6 different numbers floating out there between the land area for the borough, which is about 14.6 to 17.1. That's not counting the water element of Raritan River and the bay and the Cheesequake Creek that we own. So we're up in about 18.6, 18.7 total. But the reason that's important is because, to me, as the tax assessor, is because it says it's according to the tax assessor's records and the borough tax assessor. Yes, the record did say 9338, but I don't consider that to be anywhere near it. And under that, it starts off out of the 9,338. Sayreville had approximately 74% of the land area is improved as either residential, commercial, blah, blah, blah. The idea is to use those numbers to come up with percentages. You got to tread a little carefully because they may not be the right numbers. I'm trying to read my notes here. The tax base, the open space committee. It was mentioned a couple of times, not the committee, but the open space element. I heard her say that the county has a report of 2022 and other things that they've done. Generally, they have good reports, but I did review one where they had a lack of understanding of the tax base compared to the values, and they had it mucked up, for lack of a better term. So I would suggest that the planner consider using our open space report from 2016. It does need a little updating because it was 2016. And for instance, what the attorney mentioned about the Blue Acres, there was 149 buyouts. That's what Sayreville has. And I assume there won't be any more, but and a big loss in the rateable base. But the open space report 2016 has numbers in there that could be used for, even like he mentioned, So it wouldn't be a total loss to spend some time on leaving the county report on the side and coming back to that. One more thing on the open space. There was some comments made tonight and at a previous council meeting where what was being done as open space and spending money. The taxpayers of Sayreville have given about $40 million since 1996 to the open space taxes. 30 million, and I'm rounding off, but 30 million for the county, 10 million for the local. There were a number of things, including Beaker Farm, buying the development rights for 3 million that the borough did not pay for that because county and local state funding were used. DuPont donated 118 acres. Again, nothing came out of our open space account, but we got 118 acres. And now there's some talk about what they use it for, but we did get the acreage. There was a piece behind the county school on Cheesequake Road that is in the borough of Sayreville's name, but the county gave us the full $2.9 million. So they technically hold the strings for it, but it's in the borough's name. And that again was without using borough funds. And then there was 800K donated into, not donated, put into the O'Neill Pond hole on the right side of the Victory Bridge, which came out of the open space fund. 13 million, it was 13.8 million altogether, but we put 800,000 in. So there's been some comments about the open space, and I just want to say that I'll use the term aggressive because there was some comment to that. I'm here tonight to say that I'm aggressive on open space, and I take exception to anyone that thinks it was not living up to what it should be. And yeah, we could do better. There's no question about that. But we do have some numbers. We do have some meetings. We do have things that are there. And I'd like to offer that to the thing. I've been the chairman of the Open Space Committee since the year 2000 when it was created. Even though I don't live in town any longer, there was a position created for a citizen of the state appointed by the mayor, whereas the other appointments are council appointments. So that was done. But, you know, that's my purpose for being here, to just throw those comments on the record. I was I did make some, Jay would know, I made some limited comments about the existing master plan. And I'm ready to offer those, but it was suggested that I come here tonight, not to speak, but come here tonight to hear what was being presented. As you saw, I sat in the back and I listened to what was presented. And I'm offering us not only the tax assessor information, but where to tread lightly, but the Open Space Committee as well. I'm roping that in. Thank you for listening to me tonight, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much for those comments. Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
I have to state my name and address like in a council meeting. Donna Roberts, 369 Washington Road. And first, I want to thank Ms. Leah Fleming for a very, very informative presentation. I came here tonight to learn more about how the planning board works and what our land use rules are. So I got a really great primer on that tonight. Unfortunately, I'm going to marinate also. So at 2 a.m., I'm going to have a ton of questions, just like most of you will. I do want to, and I'm standing here not only as someone who represents the council, but more so as someone who lives here and walks our sidewalks. And because of COVID, I actually work from home, so now I also work in Sayreville. So I spend a lot of time in Sayreville. And I do want to thank Mr. Buchanan, the things that you mentioned about the adult businesses, you know, walking in that, and I appreciate you being on top of that and looking into it, and especially the encouraging homeownership. I think that's something that I do really appreciate. I think that is the stepping stone to personal wealth, and I think we should encourage much more of that rather than apartments. And the top three things on page G2: encourage owner occupancy of residential dwellings. 1D, continue to discourage encroachment of commercial or industrial and single family neighborhoods. And 1E, emphasize the importance of vigorous code enforcement programs in maintenance of viable residential neighborhoods are three very key things that I appreciate the planning board being the gatekeepers of. I also want to thank Chairman Mueller to bring up the traffic issues that we have here. Those are the things that I hear most about. And those are the things I live through the most, is the traffic issues and the overcrowding and the high density housing and the Mount Laurel decision that we have to face. And I was wondering if there was any way aspirationally that we could take in any future Mount Laurel requirements that we might have and keep those aspirations that I just mentioned, where we encourage owner occupancy for that and continue the non-encroachment of commercial areas and keep that vigorous code enforcement always. I also had the question of B2 versus B4 because I did not see the B4 zone, so I don't know enough about that. So I'm going to look forward to looking into that. And I think Ms. Fleming mentioned some setbacks because I had mentioned that was something that I had noticed is setbacks. And one of the things that I've noticed is zoning that comes up is many variances for setbacks that keep getting approved. And this might just be anecdotal, but I've been noticing a lot of that in just individuals and individual homes and even some developments. For example, I think there was a development where a two-car length driveway was required. And to fit more units, it was changed to like 1.5 car. So I think we need to just, be more cognizant of the impact down the road. So just have these good guidelines and make sure that it's really providing the vision that we all want living here for a better aesthetic. And the tree bank coordination and the setbacks, I think the one that really comes to mind is on Cheesequake Road. I don't know, I've seen the plans and I didn't expect, I've seen the plans, I didn't expect such a large wall with so little setback. So maybe if we can look into setbacks like that. I know that they're going to replace the trees there. The trees were determined to be dead and have to be taken down. It was just such a shocking visual for that. And just a couple of last things. I wanted to bring up bikeways. I think they're great for new developments, but a lot of our roads don't accommodate bike lanes. It would be dangerous. So keep in mind where those would be appropriate, maybe in the newer developments like the Riverton, but Washington Road, probably not. Which by the way is the road I live on, so yeah. And the final one is about the sidewalk plan. And I will tell you that residents who do not have sidewalks do not want them. They don't want them. So just keep that in mind. If I didn't have a sidewalk, I wouldn't want it, but on Washington Road, we have to shovel the snow. So that is a consideration. It might be nice, but if it's already on one side of the street or the roadway doesn't accommodate that, that is something I hear a lot. And it looked like most of you looked like, oh yes, sidewalks. I was like thinking, no, I hear a lot of these, so I want to make sure you're aware of that.
Councilwoman Roberts, I live on Washington Road as well. I would gladly give my sidewalk up to not have to shovel. I understand.
Yeah.
But I tell you, on Johnson's Lane, though, there's not many sidewalks and it's dangerous for the kids. And
Well, that's a different topic. Some of the roads I'm thinking of has sidewalks on one side, not the other. So let's not put it on both sides when not necessary, but as a safety concern, that's a completely different issue. But just as an aesthetic for walking around both sides of the road, I would probably think twice. So just a little bit of the feedback that I get from residents I wanted to share. I've spoken way too long. I'm going to have my 2 a.m. marinating session and writing notes about other things. I want to thank you all for letting me speak. And again, thank you for the very informative presentation.
thank you very much, Donna. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you want to, anyone else want to step up from the public? No? No? Okay.
I absorbed this.
Oops, okay, that's fair.
Close the public portion? Motion to close the public?
Close.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Motion to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Somebody dropped your pen. Oh, yeah. I think there's